is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher, mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
Folks, this is Screen Watching. My name Dan Barrett. I trust you are well. I'm joined here by my co-host Simon Foster as we are each week screen watching. This is what we do. We've watched movies, we've watched TV shows. We're here to review them, talk about them, engaged in the pitter-patter of the conversation. We're doing that. It's just like an Aaron Sorkin. We'll be walking around through the podcast, and it's a whole thing. On the podcast this week, Douglas is cancelled, the new Stephen Moffat dramedy coming out of the UK. It's not quite so new, but it's new to Australia-ish. We'll talk about that. Kraven, big blockbuster Sony film, which is such a success that it's too powerful for Sony. They're like, we're not making any more of these Marvel Spider-Man movies. We can't do it anymore. It's too much. Kraven will be the pinnacle of what we achieve. We're going to discuss that. We're going to have a brief discussion about the new Netflix series, No Good Deed. There's oh my gosh, sorry, I just read the rundown. The Boy from Macksville from Fox Sports, which will be, oh gosh, I even know who this person is, and I think about them every time I go through Macksville, the regional coastal New South Wales town. But anyway, folks, we'll talk about that later in the podcast. Let's get down to the business. Simon Foster, you're well. I trust you're well. Please be well.
Dan Barrett, I am well. I'm sweltering in this Sydney humidity, but that just means I can lie in front of the television, watch what we need to watch for screen watching, and just enjoy life in general. I hope you're well, sir. I hope the screen watchers are very well. Going to be a little tough drumming up enthusiasm for my film review today, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And I'm keen to hear what you've got to say about the new Ray Romano show. That's very interesting. So I think we should just get on with it.
Look, we should. Let's dive right into Douglas is cancelled. Let's play a clip.
That's all for today. Same time tomorrow?
Why not? See you at 6.
And that's us off air.
My wife thinks you've got chemistry.
Excuse me?
You and him on telly. Thinks you've got chemistry.
She adores you, you know that. Everyone knows that.
Sorry, what?
There's been a tweet.
What tweet?
Overheard presenter Douglas Bellows making an extremely sexist joke at a wedding.
Dad, what was the joke at the wedding?
I don't remember.
But it's probably just one of your usual ones, yeah? My usual ones. Your usual misogynist ones.
It was sexist, not misogynist.
This isn't news. It's going to be news. It's you.
She plays you.
Madeline's not like that.
Is she? It's gone nuclear.
The tweet.
What happened? Madeline.
Simon, this is a unique one to talk about. So this debuted back in late June, I think, of this year. Okay, so in the UK it played, it was an ITV program. And the premise of the program is this. Douglas Bellows, I'm reading the logline. Douglas Bellows is a widely respected middle-aged news anchor with a sidekick Madeline and a newspaper editor wife named Sheila. However, when Douglas makes an ill-advised joke at a wedding, his career is put into jeopardy because of cancel culture. Now, the big phrase to look at here, cancel culture, because this is absolutely what the program's about.
This is going to open this up a lot more than I expected. All right, let's go.
And this is where the show gets into a little bit of a timeliness issue, which is that a lot of the conversations they're having in this program certainly felt, I'm not going to say dated, but certainly felt mature in conversation. We're at like a latter point of talking about a lot of these things. But the world has changed a lot since the last episode aired at the end of July, okay, through to, as we're now here in December, as the show's debuted on ABC Australia. A lot's changed culturally since then. We saw the whole US election take place. We saw that culturally, like one of the big reasons why the Donald Trump win has been attributed is because there's a real cultural shift against a lot of the conversations that the Democrats were pushing. What that's done is resulted in a bit of a cultural sort of seismic shift where lots of the conversations we were having, people were like, well, have we necessarily been framing these in the right way? And are a lot of people being lost through these conversations? So a month and a half now of hearing a lot of conversations talking about cultural framing and pointing a lot to Me Too and that being part of the sort of cultural gumbo of it all. it's kind of meant that these conversations about people being cancelled have a real different flavour than they did when this program was broadcast. And so, because culture doesn't exist in a vacuum, a TV show is not removed from what we're talking about in real life in the same way a movie isn't, and music and books and magazines and even podcasts.
Sure.
Because all that happens, we're now in a very sort of different cultural space watching this program, which just feels a little bit dated in the way it's approaching a lot of these conversations. Now, I felt this really heavily in the first hour, because the first hour of this program, and look, I'm going to be complete cards on the table here, I did not like the first episode of this program. The first episode of this program has all the problems in this program sort of jam-packed into that first hour, which is that I don't think a lot of the jokes work. I think that for a show about cancel culture, it's really, really surface in the way that it thinks about it. Okay, and so what's happened is, and as my little blurb described, you've got this guy, Douglas Bellows, played by Hugh Bonneville. He's the host of a This Morning style TV program. So, it's a breakfast style TV show, and he's got his much younger co-host, Madeline, played by Karen Gillan, who people know from Kids Show Doctor Who, as well as other things. And then he's also got his wife, Alex Kingston, and executive producer of the morning show is... what's his name? The gentleman from Coupling, and suddenly I realise he's not in my notes here for some reason. Ben Miles. If you don't know the name, you certainly know the face.
Is the Hugh Bonneville character? I'm sensing a Piers Morgan sort of archetype here. Would that be fair to say?
Look, I mean, I think he's kind of a stand-in for any white man who's been a part of the media establishment for the last 20, 30, 40 years. They don't really play him much like a blowhard, so I don't think he's necessarily a Piers Morgan type, but I think that the casting of Hugh Bonneville has a Piers Morgan style sort of visual look to him, so that's probably a very obvious sort of comparison to draw upon, but I don't think he's really a Piers Morgan type. Piers Morgan's just a lot more bombast than this character, who's supposed to be a very sort of normie, straight down the line kind of a guy. He's a beloved.
The other key question I have is: can you reveal the joke that transpires and leads him? You won't. Okay, so that's an important part. Is it truly of the of a nature that
let me
get him? All right, okay. I'm keen. I'm excited.
Okay, let me get to this. Okay. So as I said, the first episode for me doesn't really work. A lot of the jokes are too surface, and when they introduce the idea that there's been a tweet which says that this morning TV presenter was at a wedding function, it was like a family wedding, he told some sort of a joke, okay, but the tweet doesn't say what the joke was, and the tweet's just really, really vague. And the tweet is something innocuous along the lines of, I heard... at a wedding with Douglas Bellows in attendance, he told an off-color misogynistic joke, and that's kind of all the tweet was. Where this amplifies is that, and I can't remember if this happened at the end of the first episode, at the beginning of the second one, so I'm going to put a minor spoiler warning in this one. The Karen Gillan character, Madeline, okay, she retweets the tweet. And so this sets off a much bigger... story than it otherwise would have been. It would have been a very small, innocuous tweet, but instead it's kind of blown up into this sort of much bigger thing because it's been given some weight and some oxygen from the co-host of this guy. So what that does is it spins it off, and so it becomes not so... I mean, it's certainly about the tweet, and it's certainly about cancel culture, okay? And I'm going to leave that side of it aside because we enter some pretty serious spoiler territory in a moment. But what's kind of especially interesting in that second episode is that it becomes a conversation not as much about the cancel culture as much as it is about Alex Kingston, who plays this, UK newspaper editors. They're all just a bit gross and involved in all sorts of just constant trying to cancel celebrities and posting nude photos and just all sorts of scandalous garbage. Okay, so it's interesting that she's a presence in this and structured in the way that she is, but it's about her relationship with her husband, because she'll argue with her husband in the same way that, spouses will argue, but anytime that he talks to his young co-host Madeline, she's got a way of placating him, and he'll go into any meeting with her really blustery and walk out with her completely winning him over. Okay, and so the wife is obviously very angry and frustrated by that. So it becomes a issue about sort of marital power and imbalance and insecurity, but then it leads into other areas. And as it starts to get away from the initial tweet idea, which is just like a little bit soft, okay, it starts getting some really other interesting, really complex areas. And the idea of this being like really biting satire in a way that you kind of expect this from like these sort of TV shows about the media and the behind the scenes sort of darkness and whatnot of the way that people talk to each other. Like all that just feels really just a bit too normy. I think the problem is that Stephen Moffat's not really dark enough in his heart to be able to come up with like the really sort of biting, sort of nasty, thick of it style comedic bands you kind of expect.
Why do we know Stephen Moffat? Why is that name familiar?
This is the problem with you as a film person, Simon. You just don't really embrace the TV.
I
Stephen Moffat comes about, first develops a name as the writer, co-creator-ish of Press Gang back in the day, so a kid show, but certainly raised a generation of Dan Barretts. Went off to do Coupling in the early 2000s.
I know Coupling.
I think 2000 it kicked off. Coupling's probably where he became a very big name.
Yep.
After that, took over Doctor Who, created Sherlock. Like he's, as far as UK TV is concerned, he's a pretty big deal.
Sure.
Like,
Yep.
when I say pretty big deal, really big deal. Okay, so this is his latest thing. So he tried to get this up as a stage show, never quite happened. And when you watch it, kind of like you can sort of see the idea of it being a stage show, particularly with the third episode, which is all more or less in one setting. I'm pretty sure. I think they cut away for like 2 or 3 scenes, but it's all pretty much a single room thing. Stephen Moffat, as a writer, plays around with timelines quite a fair bit. When that kicks in with that third episode, it's a bit of a flashback, and you start seeing really the origin stories and the thing that really propelled a lot of the content of that tweet. It's hard to say too much without giving it away, but what I do want to say is that first episode a little bit too soft, and part of the problem beyond the jokes just not working is that I don't think that Stephen Moffat creates enough of a basis of reality about the impact of the tweet, and so that part of it is a little too soft to really justify a lot of the rest of the stuff we see in it. And from what we see towards as the Karen Gillan character like amplifies the tweet, like it starts to make a bit more sense, but like it's just this, it's slightly underwritten briefly in that moment. I kind of wish they'd done a bit of a rewrite on that moment because it would have held up the rest of the series a lot more. But I went from watching this 4-part TV series and hating that first episode because it's so soft and so nothing, to suddenly by hitting the end of the 4th episode, and this is easily top 5, one of the best shows of the year. It's incredible.
Well, okay, that's interesting. I just want to make the point that I think in not telling us what the joke was, and in not making us part of the did he or didn't he cross the line with the joke, that feels like a missed opportunity.
No, it's not. So this is the thing. This is part of why the first episode doesn't work, because the establishment of this tweet feels so innocuous. Okay, they don't really quite give enough sort of strength to the idea that it is such a nothing tweet, but the amplification of the tweet by Karen Gillan's character really changes it. So, I mean, I get that because I get social media, but I think there'll be a lot of people sort of watching it where that's kind of lost on them slightly. They do try to talk that aspect up a little bit, especially by the time we hit the 4th episode. But by that point, like, most of the series is done by that point. So, like, it's just a bit of a weakness right at the beginning. But the rest of it and other things, and there's a very strong reason they don't tell you the content of the tweet. As a viewer, you're smart enough to work out what the content of that tweet was from the 3rd episode, but they don't explicitly say until that 4th episode. And what that joke was is absolutely what's interesting about this program.
Okay. I'm going to have to check this out now.
No, you really do. Like, this is such an intricately interesting 4-part TV program, which, yes, is slightly culturally out of date, but get past that and get past that first episode, which I do think is just a bit too weak, and you really are going to see something pretty incredible.
Is cancel culture really out of date, or is and I even hate the term cancel culture. I don't think that's a real thing. But is it really in the wake of the presidential election and the failure of the Democrats to make an impact? Is it really at the fault of of
I think
that
that-
Me Too movement and all those things that sort of tried to readdress imbalance?
So the idea of addressing imbalance isn't the problem as much as the way the conversations are framed around it. Okay, and I think you'll find the ideas of cancel culture kind of got corrupted a couple of years ago, and you're really just sort of starting to see it all sort of fall apart now a little bit. I mean, if you want to talk about cancel culture, like you can't talk about that without the idea that, hey, all these people that have been cancelled are still working and completely viable. Like it's cancel culture has kind of meant nothing. If you were going to sort of see cancel culture as being real, like, you've got that comedian who appeared at that Trump rally, what's his name? Tony Hinchcliffe. Like, that guy's making more money than he's ever made in his career at this point, and it's kind of just nonsense to say
He's making the same money. He's speaking to the same people.
Yeah, but okay, I mean, look, this is suddenly becoming a media podcast, Simon, but if you want to look at what's happened post-Trump presidency, look at the news space in the US, and I'm sorry when I say news, I'm talking about opinion news. MSNBC ratings dramatically down, CNN ratings dramatically down, Fox News ratings skyrocketing right now.
Right.
Okay, like they are
they've been empowered.
Massive culture. Yeah, that's exactly it. They're seeing a massive cultural shift towards it. So if you want to talk about the idea of cancel culture, all these people supposedly being cancelled, they're just finding greater audiences and more people coming to them right now. So there's a cultural shift. And so you can't ignore that.
And you're right, we're a media podcast, we shouldn't get into this, but I don't agree that it's without weight at the moment. And yeah, it's interesting. And I'm happy to discuss this either via emails with screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear everyone else's views on it. I'm
not talking about so much about weight as I'm talking about cultural sorry, there's a word, and we are recording this right now at 7:02 in the morning. So, the words aren't really quite coming to me right now, so I apologize. It's not so much that these conversations shouldn't necessarily be had, but the way that the world reacted and cancelled people, it's not the same conversation that was happening 3 years ago, okay? And the way that this show is structured is very much based on the way those conversations were happening a couple of years ago. So already by July this year, it was a very sort of, not completely outdated, like, I'm going to say outdated, but not irrelevant series of conversations. And again, I don't want to get into spoiler territory on this one, but what you find out in the third episode going to the fourth episode is still an incredibly viable, interesting cultural conversation that needs to be happened, and you will be absolutely kicked in the guts by this as a viewer in that fourth episode, because the viewers become complicit in what the show is talking about. Okay, so all of that weight is still in there, but the conversation around it has shifted in tone and texture.
Douglas is cancelled, is on Australian ABC as we speak, having aired on ITV in the UK, and probably available in most countries around the world. So Douglas is cancelled. I'm looking forward to it. Big Hugh Bonneville fan, certainly a big Karen Gillan fan, so there's plenty to recommend it. I went off to the movies, even off to an IMAX city, I love my IMAX, to see the new Sony Marvel project called Kraven.
My son, never show mercy. They are prey. We are predators.
Simon, I've got a question before we start this, and a quick sort of establishing statement, which I don't know is going to interfere with what you're going to say, but I think there's probably context that needs to be there. Number one, did you pay money to go and see this at IMAX?
I don't know why that's relevant, but no, I didn't. It was a preview.
Oh, okay. No, I thought maybe you actually had paid to go and see this.
Oh, no.
I was like, why would you pay money to see this at IMAX? Come on, man. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, no, you're absolutely right. I would not pay money to see this at IMAX. In fact, I would not pay money to see this, which is no reflection on the film. I just don't pay to see movies because that's what us critics do. Your other statement?
Well, I've got a second thing to drop in here. Something that people should probably realize is that when critics go and see a movie, they will see the movie in the best possible presentation. Well, generally, in the best possible presentation available. So most people, when they see this, might see it on like a VMAX screen, but Simon Foster's seen it in the best possible way. I remember when I saw the Well, I'm just saying, I just think it's kind of interesting. Like,
that doesn't affect my opinion of the film, though.
I mean, it doesn't hurt it. Like when I went and saw that Wes
Doesn't
Anderson
impact
film,
it at all.
okay, so when I went and saw that Wes Anderson film, the one about the newspaper that I've suddenly forgot the name of, the Dispatch, French Dispatch.
French Dispatch, yep.
Yeah, that ended up playing at like the big, what's the Hoist version of VMAX?
Extreme screen.
Extreme screen. I saw it on the extreme screen. That was not playing on the extreme screen anywhere else. Like the only way that you would ever see that is being in that screening, which, you know, it was kind of cool. But at the same time, like you are getting a different experience. But that said, I'm sure Kraven's playing on the IMAX screen. Surely it would be, wouldn't it?
Absolutely is. Yeah. The print was there it started the next day on the IMAX screen. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
I'm sure they don't regret that booking at all. The other thing, Simon, is just giving the bit of context and pretext for this, which is that this is not a Marvel film. This is Sony having licensed Spider-Man back in the late 90s. And so part of that deal means that they got to make all these offshoot movies, which included greats like Morbius and Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter. And this is the very last one because Sony have lost so much money on these movies now. So they've declared we're not making any non-Spider-Man movies from this point going forward. So this is the last one. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, you know, that's interesting they say that because I did read a very informed article just the other day. And before I get deeply into my review, I'll mention this, that stated that Venom, the Tom Hardy franchise featuring that character, has indeed made a lot of money for them outside the Spider-Man franchise. They have been, although they acknowledge that all three of those films, Madam Web, Morbius, and certainly Kraven, have lost big bucks. And as we record this, news is coming through that Kraven is open to a very meager $10 million in the US and is the final nail in the coffin for this character. But despite the backlash, Morbius made upwards of 200 million around the world, and they were it sort of crept into the black. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Let me just briefly sum up Kraven. It's the story of, and it's a whole bunch of Russian names, and that only makes it harder to connect with. But let me, Sergei Kravenov, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson. We see at the start of this film, he is one of the sons of Russell Crowe's Nikolai Kravenov, a brutal Russian gangster type. To toughen up his two boys, the other one, Dmitry, played by Fred Heikinger, he takes them off to deepest, darkest Africa. To kill some wild animals in only the way that rich people feel like that can make you a man. And they come across a legendary line. Now, the young boy, played by Levi Miller, Australian actor. I think a lot of this was shot in Australia, most of it. And it's cast both in front of the camera and behind the camera with a lot of Australian talent. He gets mauled by the line to some extent, but then a young girl called Calypso, who grows up to be the lovely Ariana DeBois, puts some special mystical gel into his DNA, into one of the line wounds, and very soon Sergei is sort of transforming into beastly types. As he grows into Aaron Taylor Johnson, he becomes the Kraven the Hunter character, a mythic alpha predator who can bump off bad guys and do things that normal human beings can't do, and only the way superhero movies can present that. Now, as this unfolded and the Russell Crowe character became far more prominent than I thought he was going to be, and the dynamics with the son Dmitry start to play off against the other brother, I realized this is kind of a riff on Succession. There is a family patriarchy, hierarchy kind of storyline here, which held some interest for me. The naff stuff about turning into animals and being able to hear and smell, and just like a lion would, that's all fine. That's just all superhero guff. But there was some element of this storyline which I did find a little bit engaging. It's unforgivably long at 2 hours and 7 minutes. There are passages of this which can be tightened up a lot. Really chewing the scenery in a way that I found quite entertaining is Alessandro Nivola, who plays Alexei, aka the Rhino. We don't get to see his full transformation until very late in the film, when he takes on this wildly CGI'd character facade of hardened skin and horns growing out of his head. The other bad guy in this, there's a lot of bad guys, but the other main bad guy is Christopher Abbott's The Foreigner, who I can't really tell what his superhero power was. He's kind of like a sinister version of the Flash, where he can freeze people and move in between them. And it was a very strange way to present a bad guy, and he was very ineffective. I honestly believe, and I do have to stress that I'm no comic book person, so I don't know how this all plays out in the pages of the comic book, but his character could have gone from the film with absolutely no problem whatsoever. So in the end, this is very much of the Sony template. I didn't hate Madam Web, and I didn't even really hate Morbius. I looked back through my letterbox ratings for these, and I gave all of them 3 stars because they're very minor films, but I grew up on minor superhero films like The Shadow, like Phantom. Those sort of movies are forgettable Saturday afternoon time wasters, and that's exactly what Madam Web and Morbius and now Kraven are. They're no better or worse than those sort of movies, and if that's all you're in the mood for, it'll kind of do the job. But there's a lot of clunky stuff in there that the diehards, comic book fans will absolutely rile up against. And at 70% on Rotten Tomato, that's exactly what the critical base, and I think it got a C- cinema score coming out of cinemas from the patrons during the week. So, yep, it's bringing to an end the Sony Spider-Man universe, Marvel universe, whatever they want to call it, and not a moment too soon as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. R.I.P. All
Yep.
right, Simon. Big question for you. What else have you been watching?
Well, I'm glad you bring it up. Now, I don't want to get too somber here, but it's been 10 years since the passing of cricketer Phil Hughes. Now, to our American listeners, they won't know what that means. Phil Hughes was a dazzling young opening batsman who soared very high very quickly, and was considered one of the great hopes for the future of Australian cricket. In a state versus state game 10 years ago, he was struck on the head by a rising delivery from a young bowler, and he passed away a few days later, was taken off life support when the injuries to his skull and brain could not be remedied. So 10 years later, the boy from Macksville, which, as you pointed out at the top of the show, is a North Coast town where he grew up, and which defined him as a man. The country life, the farm life, the family life that was so important to Phil Hughes is spoken of at length in this documentary. What is also spoken of and celebrated is what an incredible batsman and attacking batsman he was at the top of the order. He had clashes with the selectors, which meant that his position in the team was always under threat. He was dropped 2 or 3 times from the national team and had to fight his way back in. But he was hugely popular with his players and with the fans. People like Usman Khawaja and Aaron Finch and Ricky Ponting, all names familiar to those that love the sport of cricket, are in this documentary commenting on Phil Hughes' greatest moments as a player, but also the man himself. It was so moving and a little bit challenging to watch because it was a life snuffed out very quickly, just doing what he loved doing more than anything. And that's always tough to watch when that happens to a young man or a young woman. And the boy from Macksville is a great testament to who he was, and also a reminder of what he may have become. The stats that he left us with indicate that he could have very easily gone on to become one of the absolute greatest of all time at the top of the Australian order. So the boy from Macksville is playing everywhere. Fox Sports. In fact, if you are overseas, it's on the cricket.com.au website, where you can watch it in full for free, 70 and a bit minutes. And you'll get some understanding of what a tragic loss this was and what a great young man Phil Hughes really was. Boy from Macksville.
Yeah. Again, I know Macksville, the town, only because regularly, at least at Christmas time, I have to drive. Well, I used to drive through there, going from Sydney to Brisbane, and it would take forever. Okay, because Macksville, you'd always get traffic jams in there, and it was the worst.
Exactly right. That's
Except
how I remember it too.
Yeah, but there's a bypass that got in like about 5 or 6 years ago, and ever since then, I've never been to Macksville since.
Which kind of sucks the fun out of those northern trips. It's just a straight line to wherever you want to go now. You used to wind through these great little towns along the way up there, and that would be part of your journey. But now you just put the foot down and you're there, which is great because it's safer and it's quicker. But yeah, those little towns have suffered in the wake of that. And Macksville absolutely remembers Phil Hughes. You know, he remains one of the heroes of that town. The sporting ground, statues, murals are all over the place with that feature Phil Hughes. So it's a fitting tribute to the young man.
Yeah, I mean, no one outside of Macksville will ever see that again, but that's neither here nor there. Apparently, the bypass bridge is named after Phil Hughes.
That's exactly
So,
right.
interesting
Oh, which
side point.
reminds me, Dan Barrett, what else have you been
Yeah.
watching?
Look, a really good question. I'll talk about this briefly. There's a new TV series on Netflix called No Good Deed. Stars Ray Romano and Lisa Kudrow, which is what got me through the door. Yeah. Ray Romano, I think, is incredibly underrated. So I talked about this in my newsletter a bit during the week, alwaysbewatching.com, sign up today. Ray Romano, I first came across as one of the regular comedians that would appear on Dr. Kat's Professional Therapist in the 90s. Thought he was hilarious. The TV show started, Everybody Loves Raymond. I could not stand that program, and so he was kind of off my radar for, what was it, like 12 years, I think that program ran.
Very funny.
No, just painful. Patricia Head and big thumbs down. Don't care for that program. But Ray Romano, after Raymond, has been doing a lot of just really interesting, sort of mostly dramatic work around the place. I don't know if you ever saw the film that he wrote and directed a couple of years ago, Somewhere in Queens.
Sure did. Yep,
Yeah.
terrific little film.
Yeah, really, really good. Really underseen. I actually am surprised that you've seen it just because so few people have seen this thing.
I watch everything. Well, I think it turned up on one of the Max. I think it's on one of the platforms that we watched. Yeah, it certainly got no significant release out here in Australia. But
obviously, Simon, we don't have Max in Australia, so you would not have seen it here on Max.
Oh, I get that, yes.
Yeah. It's also unlikely that you watched it at hulu.com.
Probably didn't watch it at hulu.com either, no.
But anyway, I do know that it's at hulu.com for our US compatriots. Anyway, Simon, he's in this new TV series called No Good Deed. Him paired up with Lisa Kudrow, who, again, I was never really a big Friends person. I've seen the first season and a bit of that program, but that's about it. But, you know, she's done some
two of the biggest sitcoms of the last 30 years, and Mr. TV Guy hasn't watched any of them. What's the deal?
No, Simon, I've watched some of it. I didn't care for it. I didn't keep on watching.
Okay. The man of the people, Dan Barrett, don't run with the crowd on those two.
That's fine, but I was watching other popular shows at the time. The Office, you may have heard of that program. That was doing all right at the time. And I'm sure I watched another TV program during the 15 years those shows were running.
Sure.
But interested in her because obviously done really interesting dramatic work around the place, and I think Kudrow is just a strong presence in anything. I don't really have a problem with their casting in this; they're perfectly fine. I just don't really care for the writing in this program. So Liz Feldman's the creator of this program. I think that her dialogue is always really, really noxious and too surface, and I just never really find much in her characters that I'm particularly that interested in engaging in. She's responsible for that program Dead Like Me, if I've got the title right.
Dead to Me.
Dead Like Me was the show with Mandy Patinkin for the first season about like the ghosts haunting that lady whose name I've forgotten. Anyway, Dead to Me, I was never really into that, and Liz Feldman on this one's just kind of create another, I think it's a bit of a stinker. I know you're a fan of Dead to Me, and you're also into this one, so it's a taste thing, but, for those of us with taste, big thumbs down. This the show, Dead to Me, I think was a little bit better critically received than No Good Deed has been. I think it's been a bit of a middling response. But to me, the characters didn't really resonate that well. I think the dialogue just sunk anything that was interesting about the characters. Pretty interesting cast for the most part. Cast members, just to give a few names in there. Lisa Kudrow and Ray Romano, as mentioned. Linda Cardellini, who I like. Luke Wilson, who I like. Dennis Leary's in this, who I like. I never know how to pronounce this guy's name. Oti Fagbeni. He's the guy that is from Handmaid's Tale, and we saw him recently in Presumed Innocence.
Putting on that funny voice.
Yeah, really, really strange voice.
In Presumed Innocent, he was a bit Ray Romano in that one.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Yeah, maybe he was doing Romano in that. But anyway, I find him really just deeply engaging as a presence. Only because every time he's on the screen, I'd go, who is this guy? Why have I just discovered this actor for the first time? It's like, oh wait, no, it's OT again. Like every time, I never quite know if it's him because he's doing funny voices or just seems to carry himself. And I don't know if he like changes weight a fair bit around the place, if that's what's going on. I don't know. But he's a he's a British actor. He's a British actor, so that might explain why he does so much of accent change work.
Who's the other actress in it who was in Broad City?
Abby Jacobson.
Abby Jacobson, who's very.
And this is the part where I say I liked most of the cast. Okay, but Abby Jacobson, oh my god, she's like pulling teeth for me. But on the plus side,
what is going on? I'm totally at odds. Yeah. Linda Lavin is great to see her, and she has a couple of very funny scenes as sort of the Karen of the neighborhood. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I am at 180 degrees opposite view on this one. I thought it had some very sharp, funny dialogue. I thought the whole thing about trying to snare a house in LA's real estate market was very funny. The guy who plays the real estate agent and the encounter they have at the dog grooming parlor a few episodes in was very funny. Yeah, this spins off in a similar sort of direction that Dead to Me took. Some very dark moments lightened by some very crisp dialogue that I really enjoyed. So yeah, I'm at opposite ends of the spectrum on this one for you.
Yeah, well, I think it stinks. Anyway, the last cast member I want to mention is Teyonah Parris, who's also in this one. And Teyonah Parris has a big profile these days because she was in the Marvels, and also the what was the Agatha? No, I don't know if she was in Agatha all along, but the other one, WandaVision. She was also in that one and got a pretty big bump.
Quality cast.
I know her best from season 5 of Mad Men, where she really made herself known in that. But anyway, I mentioned her at the end only because she was also born in 1987, which to me, Simon, is a great way for us to segue into what else we've been doing, including a little podcast where we talk about the movies of 1987.
That is beautifully done. See, this is why you're the podcast king, doing stuff like that. Yes, Best Movie in 1987 is our new podcast project. We're about 8, maybe 9 episodes into this wonderful endeavor. As we speak, we go back to the year 1987. We plan to watch 100 movies from that year to determine if exactly 1987 is the greatest movie year ever. I can tell you now it isn't, but I'm going to keep listening for all 100 episodes to see if I can convince myself. We are just about to press play on...
It doesn't help, Simon, that, of the 8 we've done so far, there've been 2 good to great ones.
Yes.
But I think we're about to start hitting a patch, which might win you back over into the 87 camp.
I'm very excited that Some Kind of Wonderful, Lethal Weapon, Tin Men, Raising Arizona, Angel Heart are all coming up soon, which isn't to say that our episodes featuring with Nail and I, The Kindred or Over the Top are in any way lesser episodes. They're just as entertaining, except that the movies, not so much.
I will say in the last 2 weeks, we've done Mannequin. Okay.
Good.
Yeah. Fantastic Conversation. Not movie. And then also Over the Top, which is a Sylvester Stallone arm wrestling family melodrama, which is a fairly terrible movie, but I think actually made for a pretty fun podcast.
One of my favorites so far. So get on over to Best Movie Year 1987. Where can people find it, Dan Barrett?
You can visit bestmovieyear.com. And of course, you can find the podcast on all the usual platforms. But my recommendation would be watch it on Spotify or YouTube because there's video. And there's a lot of video clips that I incorporate through the edit on it, as well as a few little, visual jokes here and there.
You do good work. When you're not watching Best Movie in 1987, you can go to all what things that I do. First of all the Screen Watching socials, at Screen Watching Podcast on Facebook, Threads and YouTube at Screen Watching. Email us at screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. And when you tire of all of those, you can check out what I do on screen-space.net. What do you do, Dan Barrett?
Look, alwaysbewatching.com is my main thing, so hit that website. It's a daily newsletter that has all the interesting news and stories about the TV and streaming worlds with a little bit of commentary and analysis as it goes on through the week. There's also some bonus newsletters you get, so occasionally I do interviews on there. I do like a weekly TV guide. There's a whole bunch of things you get some value from. So anyway, sign up for that one at alwaysbewatching.com.
Very exciting. That comes to an end, this latest episode of Screen Watching. It is very early in the morning. Our brains aren't really working, but I think we managed to pull through that with a modicum of coherency.
Indeed. Folks, we'll be back next week with more of this thing. See you then.